I won't art direct at all. No, I'm very excited about this. So everybody, welcome to Ray's painting demo tonight. Got a couple of really quick things I want to just roll through, and that is we are here with Ray, obviously, and Ray's going to be continuing the still life. I think it's, but in a traditional fashion. Um, we had our first our first challenge was a self-portrait challenge. This was our winner, Addie. Next month, the beginning of next month, John Nymeister is going to be choosing the still life challenge. And Ray, I suggested that to Ray, and Ray's put a lot of emphasis on still life. And I love looking at these pictures. These are absolutely beautiful. So if you haven't, go look at Ray's site, go to his Instagram, follow him, look at all the beautiful paintings, the still lifes, the paintings of houses, everything that he does. But he does still life really, really well. And I think this is the most recent one.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I'm paying attention, Ray. I'm keeping my eye on you. This thing slays me, Ray. This is awesome. The the
Thanks.
the the interior exterior you feel. I mean, it is Bonnard, it's Diebenkorn, it's all that stuff going on, and I can see the influences. And man, have you handled it beautifully? This is absolutely awesome. I love this piece.
I've never heard of those artists, nor do I,
Yeah,
admit to stealing from them profusely.
never looked at them.
Never looked at them. Never looked at them.
Well, you're not going to convince me of that.
Right.
You handled it. You handled it your own way. It feels like you're painting, and it's beautifully done. Uh,
Thanks.
Great job. Just real quickly, next week we will be here. We're on with Ray. Ray's out the door, and we bring the new bring the new talent in, and it's John Nymeister. John is a senior concept artist at High Res Studio. Fabulous, fabulous concept artist, illustrator. Here's a few of his images. And we might say a few more words about John along the way tonight, but he will be here next Monday night. Timmy, we are ready to go. So I am going to stop sharing, and thank you, Timmy, for putting this together as always, and Ray.
Yeah.
And please ask questions along the way tonight. And
Yeah, ask questions in the Ask Me Anything channel. And yeah, just, enjoy the ride.
right, you can make it tough on Ray. That's the job. So we're all set to go.
Okay. Is that, I never asked, is that the screen with me redundant? Are you seeing me twice?
No.
Because I could have. Oh, okay. Great. All right, everyone.
John answered, but I am. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right next to each other, but that's good though.
Okay, because I could actually blow up my palette if that makes a little bit more sense.
Yeah, do that.
Do that.
Okay.
Do that for sure.
I thought it was a confidence thing, having multiple.
Yeah. The more of me, the better. At least that's what my mom says.
All right, I'll turn my camera off, not to confuse anybody or scare anybody. So Ray, while you're positioning, what are you going to attack this thing with tonight?
So I'm going to be attacking this thing with some, basically some just oils today. But I'm going to be showing how I do my my mounting process, and so that should be a lot of fun.
Oh, cool.
And so you'll be able to see my oil palette and everything like that. But I'm going to show you how I mount this image right here. So what we have on the easel is my painting, my digital painting printed out and mounted onto a board, the board that I showed you, unprimed plywood board that's cradled. So I went to after doing my painting, I went to Kinko's and I printed out a couple of on a color laser printer, some color copies of my of the painting itself, and I'm going to show you how I actually mounted this using matte medium on my on this board. Oops, on the board
The
itself.
elixir of life.
The elixir of life, yeah.
It really is.
So, all right. Okay, so what I'm going to do today is mount this to a piece of cardboard, and then I'll show you how to do that. The way I do this is doing this through a wet mount process where I wet the paper and I put some matte medium down, and then I basically squeegee out the rest or any sort of air pockets with just some a brayer of sorts. You could pretty much use anything. I like to use this sort of printmaking brayer because it's just a little bit easier, and I'll roll it right onto the paper itself.
So is that just a masonite cradle
This right here
that,
that I'm holding?
that you mounted it to?
Yes, yeah. The thing that I mounted it to was just a masonite cradle. And you could pretty much mount it to any rigid surface that you that you want. Now, because I'm treating this as if this were a gallery painting, I traditionally mount things on a masonite cradle. So that's the reason why I'm doing that with this, because then I could paint the sides, I can do and make it look really nice, and so it works well with or without a frame. But for a lot of my demonstrations, I like to just use whatever rigid surface I can find. So this is just some, you don't need a masonite cradle or anything like that. You could just use cardboard. That's pretty rigid. The smoother the better. This is corrugated. It's not too bad. It's thick corrugated. It doesn't have crazy corrugations in it. But anything that's as smooth as possible is the best
Yeah,
case
masonite's a
scenario.
fabulous product for an artist because
Absolutely.
you can buy it in bulk. You can buy huge sheets of it and cut it whatever size you want. It's easy to cut and break. Um, and it's got a one really smooth side on it, and it accepts this kind of thing really well.
So John, I think I left my matte medium on the stairs. I'm just gonna run and grab it really quick. Sorry, everyone.
Okay, that's
I,
fine.
I kind of need the matte medium to do the matte medium thing, but you
Yeah,
can cut. Timmy can cut this out.
okay. This is good to see. Mounting, whether if you're working in collage or doing mounting a drawing, something like this, it's doing it where it's going to be there and be archival and stay. I mean, basically, he's going to be entombing this thing with plastic, and it's not going anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the reason why I do it. Yeah, is because it allows me to basically paint over this with acrylics. I can go pastel. I can color pencils, oils, anything I want, and it's completely archival, which is great. Okay, so let's get this
While you're
showing.
while you're doing that, quick question from Chris is: when printing something from digital, do you feel it's important to consider CMYK versus RGB?
It's a great question. I have found that if I print in sRGB, it tends to print better for me on the printers that I'm working with. Usually, sort of the large format Canon printers, I think, is the one that, or these like laser printers. So I haven't found success using CMYK, but it's probably more due to the fact that I don't really know what I'm doing when it comes to that end of the printing spectrum. I just know what works for me and what results I get. It also helps that you have a really well calibrated monitor. The monitor I use is I have a 27-inch iMac that is really well color calibrated. and it has a good amount of spectrum in terms of like RGB, Adobe RGB, and so it gives you accurate color basically. So basically what I end up with is usually what I see on screen. The only thing that you have to be careful with, and I think this is probably where CMYK or proofing it would come into play, is you just have to make sure you don't have your image too dark, because a lot of that stuff will just get lost in the printing. So I hope that helps. Okay. I don't know if I answered that question, but
You did.
okay, great. Okay. All righty. So here I have my my stuff right here. I'm going to do this on top of my palette here. Not really all that important, but so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to wet this paper. And the reason why I want to pre-wet this paper is because I want it to make sure that it's not going to warp or buckle on me or shrink or expand unevenly. So if only the bottom's wet and the top's not, then you'll get these crazy ridges on the paper and all these air gaps and everything like that, because the paper is shrinking and expanding in different parts. And so you want a nice even set of that expansion that happens. So the way you do this is I'm just going to take some water that I have right here in a with an old brush. Now it's tinted right here because I was actually mounting this piece, and so it was clear water that looks like this in a I found that most artists used Tutu Rosso crushed tomato cans. I think you can find them at Dick Blick for a lot of money. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to wet
Just
both
like
sides.
good, clear buffalo fountain water.
Right. Clear buffalo fountain water. Now that's a trade secret here. Okay. So you got to work pretty quickly when doing this. You can't like go out for lunch in between this thing. It's got to kind of happen all at once. A lot of times it's going to be a little stressful, but I've actually figured this out. I saw it first when I was in grad school at the Academy of Art, University in San Francisco. Saw a lot of illustration students in this class called narrative painting that I was taking with my teacher Craig Nelson, do work that was half traditional, half digital. Now I'm just doing the opposite, which is half digital, half traditional. But it wasn't until I really saw the artist Donato Giacola mount his pieces. This is the way he works, where he mounts printouts of his drawings, that I started to use it myself. So I'm going to go ahead and put this off to the side. And I'm just going to grab some matte medium. And I'm going to put just a little bit in the center right here. You don't need too much. You just need enough that it covers, a nice solid layer covers.
Show the jar. Put it up in front of the camera.
Oh, sorry. There you go. I found that the medium doesn't really, the brand hasn't had any effect on me in terms of I've used Winsor Newton, I've used Utrecht, Blick. I just like the Liquitex because it's, I don't know. I haven't really seen much of a difference. If it in the ultra cheap matte medium, I think I've seen more of like a plasticky difference. Matte medium itself should give you like a little bit of texture on it. Now this is different from if you ever seen Chris Payne work. He uses ultra matte medium over his drawings. It's a little different. It's not as like opaque. This dries fully transparent, but doesn't give you as much of a tooth as ultra matte medium. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I've coated the top with matte medium. I'm going to go ahead and apply the print and line it up. Now I've cut this board to around the size of this print. With smaller pieces, you could kind of maneuver it, and you don't have to be super careful. But the larger the piece gets, especially on this sort of cheap printer paper, the more at risk you are for it to rip. I'm just going to put a touch more matte medium on here so I can maneuver the piece around here.
While you're doing that, will the laser copy paper affect the painting in long term? Is it acid free?
Yeah, the paper is acid free, but it's not going to really matter because, like John had mentioned, it's going to be entombed in matte medium. So you're going to be fine. You want to, if you're really worried, you could always print out stuff on your own in terms of like or like a cardstock of some sort, or Bristol paper, or so on and so forth.
I mean, can you imagine some of the Rauschenbergs and
You're right.
Some of the collage artists that have done this and the material wasn't near as good as they're using right now.
Did Rauschenberg use like a matte
I don't know
medium, or
use all kinds of glues and stuff?
Yeah, like rubber cement and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just take this, and I'm just going to lightly roll out with a brayer, and you'll see some excess or air bubbles. I don't know if you can see that, if that's coming through. It's a little glary. But air bubbles, I'm just going to work out the air bubbles, and you go from the center out. And you go very, very, you put some pressure down, but don't get too crazy with the pressure, because if you do, then you'll squeeze out all of the matte medium, and you don't want to do that. Now, you can work relatively quickly. It's recommended that you do, but this is a little bit more, not as time sensitive as like wetting the paper and getting it fixed to the board. So you have a tiny bit more time. You don't have a million years though, because you need to get a layer of matte medium on here. And so what I like to do is just sort of check to see if I have any large air bubbles. Looks good. Looks nice and flat here.
It looks corrugated.
Looks corrugated, yeah. So you see some of that texture coming through.
I like
it. It's just a board, yeah. And you can, maybe that's something that people could use to your advantage. And so then all I need to do is just place a layer of matte medium on top, and basically finishing off the entombing process. I love that word, John. That's great. I'm going to steal that if you don't mind.
It's not mine, but it's not mine to steal. But
it's not yours. It's like the right of ownership, right? It's like, well, you had squatters' rights on it, so. All right, so I'm going to just clean this off, because you want to make sure you clean it off, because you could really wreck your brayer if you don't, if you leave matte medium stuck on there. But that should dry up, and it will dry clear. And then you could, it'll look essentially like, like this painting that I have right here. And then what I like to usually do after that is just add maybe a second layer. I will usually leave a little bit of white area on this, so it goes over my board, and then I'll usually trim it off with like a utility knife of some sort, and that's how you get like a nice clean edge, and then you could just sand the edges themselves.
Have you ever used a foam roller to lay it down?
What do you mean?
Well, I'm reading a question.
Like are you talking about like the foam roller, like in the house painting and stuff?
Yeah, like using a roller foam roller, like a paint roller?
To lay down matte medium. No, I haven't, but I've done it with gesso. And that's a great texture that leaves.
Yep.
It's nice. It's almost like a little pebbly, nice tooth to it. Yeah, whatever works. I mean, this is just an old cheap brush, that I use. It leaves brush strokes, which is really nice that I like to use on this and adds texture to things. But if you don't like that, then you could use something like a foam brush. You could use a roller. You could use pretty much anything you want.
When you
Um,
were speaking about David Grove and you were talking about his work and putting like controlled texture down, I was always fascinated with. I've tried it multiple times and had some success with it, but artists that would design their texture before they start working on their board, and
right.
they would consider their layout and their composition and their drawing, and they would think about where they wanted their texture or if they wanted to follow the shapes of major objects in it. You can certainly do that. You can do that with the matte medium or gesso or whatever.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And I do that a lot of times with matte gel is what I do it with. And I I don't have that with me, but it's basically just a thicker version of matte medium. That actually that last painting that you showed, that still life with the window looking out, I built up a lot of texture on the window side of things so that you would get a little bit more of a glow effect. And um, it helps to just build up texture, pre-build up texture, so that you can save your layers of paint and you can do a lot more things in one layer of paint. Now, in this case, where would I sort of build up that texture? Probably around here. That's an option that I could have. Uh, you know, I always really kind of revel in, like, I'm always impressed by people who could do it in the gesso stage. Kind of where they, David Grove would we usually do it because he would take a sketch and project an image of a sketch onto the board that he was working on, and then take gesso and, using that sketch as a guideline, build up the areas and the brush strokes and design everything, like everything, in that gesso stage like that. And Juice Juicin does the same thing.
Bart
um,
Forbes did it.
Bart Forbes, yeah. So it's a way of working. I like, because I'm working with a digital printout, um, and I have matte gel and it dries transparent. I'm doing the same thing. I could just see my drawing underneath. It's not, no real difference really. It's just you're doing the same thing. Okay. So I'm about to paint on this. I have my palette right here. I can go through some of my this is basically like a palette that I'm in the middle of painting a painting, but this is the usual palette I work with. These are a bunch of grays that I've mixed up from piles of paint that I had while working on previous paintings. And so what I'll do is, once my area gets saturated with mixed paint, I'll scrape it together and form like a little pile of paint and put it off to the side. And that will be like a neutral that is specific to my painting. And I find a lot of times it helps me if my painting gets out of line, right, where it doesn't feel like it's fitting into my painting. Adding a little bit of that neutral will help push it back and get me into the realm that I'm trying to aim for in the painting. So I'll keep them around every so often, because they're nice neutrals, and what I mean by neutrals, they're really kind of desaturated colors, which is nice for mixing. So I can pick them, pick and choose. Um, so that's one reason why I do it. But a lot of times also it's because I'm a little lazy, and I'm just trying. I don't want to waste paint, and so I'll like, oh, I could use this. I'll use this later, and so I'll usually keep it around until it dries up on me, and then I just get rid of it in frustration. But so talking about my palette, I have white, titanium white. I like titanium white. I've used flake white. That's great. Permalba white, which is titanium and zinc mixture, is pretty good. Um, you know, whatever you want to use, is fine. I like flake and titanium. This is actually alkyd white that I have right here, which is just a fast drying white, basically, because I want this painting to dry pretty quickly. So I have cad yellow light, cad red light, cadmium. When I say cad, it's short for cadmium. Cadmium red light, alizarin crimson, quinacridone magenta, ultramarine blue, cerulean blue, and then I like to have like a green of some sort. So this is Prussian green, I think. I'll use Viridian from time to time. I've been using this thing called cobalt turquoise recently, which is a small amount of that you're seeing there. It's not really, it's just a convenience color. A lot of these are convenience colors. I usually sit, if I only had a choice of picking a certain amount of colors, all I would really need is a yellow, a red, and a blue. So, I've done, in my classes where I teach painting, we're usually just using yellow light, cad red light, and ultramarine blue. And then maybe sometimes throwing in a burnt umber or something like that if you wanted to get super dark. But you really don't need much. These are just convenience colors. And sometimes you'll see them, you dip into it, sometimes you won't. It all depends on the color that I'm mixing. Okay, so before I start off on this, one thing you're going to notice is that the surface itself is not, it's almost like a matte surface. And it's because I use matte medium and it gives, the great thing is it gives me a texture, but since I'm going to color, I want to match the colors that were on my print to, match my oils to the colors that were on my print when I saw them on screen. So pretty close to that. And because that was on a glossy screen, I want to work off of a glossy painting that I'm working into. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to establish what's called the couch, which is just basically I'm going to spread a bunch of oil medium, a thin amount over this whole thing. So I have a little bit of medium over everything. Helps with brush flow. I don't get too scratchy on my oil paints, and helps with the matching of the color. And it allows my paints to dry consistently throughout my painting a little bit more. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Now, there's tons of ways of tons of mediums you could use. Different mediums do different things. If I want to, usually when I'm painting, I like my paints to be a little bit open. I don't want them to dry too quickly because I like to adjust and readjust things. And to do that, I'll use this thing called Winsor Newton Artist Painting Medium. Oops, there we go. All it really is just some linseed oil mixed with mineral spirits. And there's different types. I think this is 4 parts mineral spirits to 1 part stand oil, I think, or maybe linseed oil. Very common medium. Super easy to make yourself. Again, I am just out of convenience, really. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply everything over with a makeup wedge. I really like using these things because they're, I'll usually sort of, certain colors will go dull on you. It's usually the heavier colors that do that. If I'm using earth colors like this yellow ochre, that will do that as well. This will allow me to kind of get into it and oil it out if I need to, or add oil to kind of reconstitute it like I'm doing right now without messing around with too much of the painting.
I'm going to ask another quick question so I don't fall too far behind. How long does it take for the matte medium to dry? And using a hair dryer, does it rush it?
Yeah. So it takes, I don't know, doesn't take too long, depending on how large the painting is. I had a 24 by 24, especially around in where I'm at in Buffalo. It's pretty cold. So when you're dealing with a lot of cold weather, things dry a little slower. So it took an hour and change to get one of my 24 by 24 paintings dry. I could have easily used a hair dryer.
It doesn't cause any problems with it drying. It just makes it.
No. Yeah, it just makes it dry faster. Yeah. I try not to, I will add this, that I try not to use the hair dryer in the initial mounting process. The only reason why is because I'm worried that the top layer of matte medium is going to dry different than the bottom layer of matte medium that's underneath, that's in between the paper and the board. So I try to let it kind of air dry. But when I put on the next, second, or sometimes third layers, usually 2 to 3 layers of matte medium I put down, a second and a third one after my initial one, I will, I'll hair dry it. I have no problem doing that.
Anyone
And
that's gone with us in isolation with Chris Payne, that's what he's doing with his hairdryer.
right.
Yeah.
And that's
Sometimes he remembers to turn his mic off, and sometimes he doesn't.
Oh goodness. Okay, so you should start to see. I don't know if you can start to see it.
Yep.
Let's see.
Can see it.
There it is. You can start to see it getting glossy on you, and the dark's getting darker.
Color more true.
Color is more true. It's much more saturated. And it should start to resemble my painting from last week. Now, this is cheap printer paper. If you have a, I've done this with Bristol paper or Strathmore 500 multimedia paper, which is what Donato Giacola uses. If you have a printer that prints out that has water resistant inks, you can do the same thing with this and get an even better printout. This cost me like, I don't even know how many, maybe 60 cents, 65 cents in FedEx Kinko's. So it wasn't too much of a financial burden.
And so Donato just transfers the drawing, right? I mean,
he transfers the printout of his drawing.
Of the drawing. I just want funny why he doesn't just draw it up bigger. I mean, or just project it up bigger.
So what he I think the reason why he does that is the same reason why I do it, is that if his drawings, his studies are, fairly finished, and I'll do this a lot of times for my own studies, that I'll scan them in or I'll do a digital underpainting. If I have everything drawn out, I don't want to redraw it again because I spent all that time doing it. And the advantage of doing that is he can basically just print it out, and then he has his original drawing still around. And so what he does is he sells his drawings, and in addition to his paintings. And so it's a nice thing. And if you mess up, which I've done, I've totally wrecked paintings. I don't have to worry about redrawing or anything, or redrawing stuff and then messing up not getting it quite right because I'm frustrated and I want to get to the painting. I'll just print out a new one and remount it.
Yeah.
On something.
Well, it's really common for, hell, like my father, Gary Kelly, everybody I know would use a opaque projector to to blow their studies up. Not to do the drawing. There's a big difference, and there's a time and a place for an opaque projector. Don't rely on it to do your drawing. Rely on it to blow your drawing up in scale and transfer it. Gary was so emphatic about that. It's like, I use it. He was very straightforward about it because I use an opaque projector on almost all my pieces, but it's only to project my own drawings.
Yeah, and the opaque projector is not going to make you a magical.
Yeah, it's not going to help your drawing.
No, it'll, especially when you start to cover it up.
Well, the good thing is it's going to make your bad drawing bigger.
Right. Okay, so what I'm doing right here is, and let me just move up here just so I can be a little bit more in line here. I'm just checking my 40 cameras here. There you go. Let me get myself in line. Okay, so what I'm going to do is find again my darkest dark on my painting and then work from there. I'm using my underpainting as a guide, so this colorizing process should go pretty quickly. Now, I'm going to go in opaquely with touches of paint. This is a process that people call tiling, which I'm just basically putting shapes of colors down that represent plane and the, you know, form and light and shadow changes and things like that. You don't have to apply paint like this. You can work it over in like really subtle washes if you wanted to, or go super thickly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try and get the exact color and match it, and then move on to the next. And what I like to do is just sort of test my color out to see if it works. And if it doesn't, I could just always wipe it out. And that's what I'm going to do once I find my paper towels here. Okay.
Ray, how is that 10 by 10 or 12 by 12? How big is the?
This is an 8 by 10 painting.
Okay. Looks square in your camera.
Oh yeah, it kind of does.
Hmm.
All right. Now, there's so many ways I've applied paint with stuff like this. It all depends on the painting. I usually, what I've been recently doing is painting stuff in acrylics opaquely first, doing my passes in acrylics first. And that's usually what I do if I have like a gray, like blowing up a study, like I showed everyone last week. I should say 2 weeks ago when I showed my process, or you know, where I just have a line drawing out. I like to have an acrylic pass, especially if I'm on a deadline, because I need I want my initial layers to dry quicker. Using alkyds helps too. They're a little toxic, so I try not to use them a lot, especially in enclosed areas. But they're great if you're on a deadline.
I used to use, for the illustration work I did in oil, I used to use alkyd white and an alkyd burn umber. And then
Oh,
everything else could be whatever,
right.
straight oil. And those two things would dry everything.
Yeah. Right, because it pretty much would go into all the
Right.
colors, right? I could see
How
them.
common value was with
Yeah.
those, yeah.
So I'm basically just adding, let's see if we could see that here. Hopefully you can. I'm just going to adjust this here. There we go. I have a circular polarizer on my camera here, so it removes all the glare. Only the best for the studio bridgers.
That's right. Man, you might be the first one that have mentioned it using a polarizing lens for your. You have a polar. What camera are you streaming that through?
This is through my iPhone.
And you have a polarizing lens for that?
Yeah, so I have a 52 millimeter polarizer and a basically an adapter and a case that goes over my specific iPhone lens.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Do you shoot your work that way, like cross polarization with polarizing?
Yes. Yeah. So I have polarized circular polarizer on my 52 millimeter circular polarizer that I use for my SLR and for my iPhone, and then I have polarizers on the lights that are hitting this this piece.
And you just dial it until it disappears.
Yep. It's a great.
I had
You're saying that Brent.
Yeah, Brent taught me that.
Yeah.
We learned how to do that with 4x5s because we were shooting in fact, I still have the 4x5 camera, and would shoot 4x5 because that's what everybody wanted to see portfolios in.
Right.
And it was the best quality, unless you went to an 8x10, but it was the best quality. You know, a 4x5, they could make it as big as you want. It had enough resolution to it.
Without bankrupting yourself, right?
Without what?
Bankrupting yourself, you know.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were a big deal if you had your portfolio in 8x10s.
Jeez, I don't even know. I mean, how much would something like that cost, an 8x10?
Well, I don't know. I never did it. I would assume it was considerably more expensive than the 4x5 transparencies would
Right.
$60 a shot. 20,
$60.
25 years ago.
My
So that's
God.
why I invested in my own lights and camera and everything. You know, I had to.
That's a down payment on a Maserati, folks. You know.
Well, you had, you know, each. You know, I had. Most people did. You know, your agent had 3 or 4 books, 3 or 4 portfolios filled with 4x5s. Maybe you had 40 or 60 images in each one. Do the math.
Wow.
Yeah, got expensive.
Yeah,
Kids
to
got
think
it way
today.
too easy now. All this digital stuff, it's way too easy. I don't understand it, but it's cheaper for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Timmy and I were just, uh, before we set up, Timmy, John, and I were talking about how, you know, in 5 years, like time, the advancements of cell phone video, the fact that this is on a cell phone 5 years ago would have been kind of laughable in a sense.
So what is it you're doing? You're painting a still life?
Right, right. It's like, can you describe it? It
Now,
looks
is that a
like
brush? Is that a brush or a shovel you're using?
right. Looks like really bad Tetris right now. Okay, so basically all I'm doing is taking my reference and I probably should have shown that. My apologies. Um, and painting up the colors.
Are you looking at a device? Is your reference on a device or is it?
Yeah, so the reference that I'm looking on right here is on my screen. I have a Cintiq here as my second monitor, and I'm just staring at it and then painting it up. And I have it at an angle so that it's all I need to do is just move my eyes pretty much, and I can keep my head relatively stable. It cuts down on the time it takes me to have my eyes go from my reference to my painting.
Yeah, that's the whole reason. Like when we're drawing, I print everything out, and it's like right next to my drawing. So
Right.
because my eyes don't adjust as fast as they used to. I don't.
Yeah, can we talk about that actually? I really like that. Like it's these little things that like when I was started to become trained, properly trained, I realized, that how detrimental it was that I wasn't doing that. I used to hold my reference, used to have it on the floor. I used to kind of look at it from an angle. I used to be behind all these things, and I used to be super far away, or it never was really kind of close, and I never would really do a really stress over printing out really good references. I mean, all of this stuff, you know, it might not seem like much, but it makes a huge difference.
Does
You
when
know,
you
it,
see it.
yeah, exactly. Um,
I have this. You're describing this as like you getting into this like sea of technology to paint. Like you buckle in, put the helmet on, and
right.
you got the earbuds in. You got a little voice. Somebody's dialing into you. Right,
Yeah, yeah.
values off. Right, right.
Yeah. Timmy's hooked up to my vitals. Ray, I can't. I notice your value's off and your blood pressure is rising. Are you okay?
Do you need assistance? You need somebody to come in and help you, right?
Yeah, I know,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it's like a sci-fi. Yeah,
Hmm.
we've got the
It's a movie.
what yeah, what we need is like the astronaut space helmet video feed, you know, the camera that's like attached to your forehead.
Yeah.
Right, right.
Are you hooked in? Are you belted? Are you belted in so you won't fly off?
Okay, I'm just adjusting my palette so you can see a little bit better. I hope that works here. Let's see.
Yeah.
There we go. Sorry, folks. Things went all wacky when I
Did
forgot my
you
matte medium.
do you I like kind of what you were talking when you were talking about color. Obviously, you're not as long as you have the primaries there, you feel you can get there. Uh,
Absolutely.
but I like what you were calling them convenience colors because they're in betweens. They're already there. They're already
Yeah, they are.
something, and that's exactly what they are. Um, you can get about any place with the yellow, red, and blue that you have there.
Yeah, it's
And
funny. It's like I would mix them anyway. You end up mixing them with your brush or with the palette knife anyway. And so, you keep track of like, oh, geez, I've mixed this color a lot. And so they're convenience because you're just like, okay, here's a whole tube of it. I know artists that actually, instead of buying them, they'll go ahead and mix up their favorite tubes of paint and tube them themselves. Um, it's been done for centuries. It's really not that big of a deal. You can get empty tubes and a whole box of them for pretty cheap.
my dad did that with all his acrylics.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Put them
He used
all
to have
in,
like condiment things,
yeah,
right?
put them in ketchup tubes. And
That's
squeeze them out,
genius.
and he'd mix it. He'd probably mix up. He'd buy gallons of exterior oil-based house paint, and buy gallons of it. Mix up like these big, like a ketchup that you'd find on a table in a restaurant in a diner.
Incredible.
And go to a restaurant warehouse and buy all these tubes or buy all these jars, whatever they are, and he'd like mix his paint that would last like a year and a half, and he'd do it again.
Wow. There you go. So if you're shopping at an art store, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah,
You need to go to
got to go to
a
restaurant supply and a hardware
r-
store.
yeah, that's it. Yeah. You
Sure,
know
when
what? I'm definitely doing it wrong. Okay, so I'm just basically working in this. There's a lot of cools. I want to surround. Usually what I like to do is work. It's a couple of ways I like to work, but most of the time, I like to work my larger shapes first, and then my smaller shapes second. And so the reason why is because the larger shapes have the most amount of influence over the way the piece looks versus smaller shapes, which have less amount of influence the way a piece works. So I make sure that I am working large to small.
wow, one of the participants says, "Yeah, I make my own paints from pigments."
There you go.
Yeah, that's that's not the convenience color.
No,
That's hard work.
but that's you
You
get
learn a lot.
uh, you learn a lot, and it's really nice to paint with paint that's just been just kind of mixed from straight up pigment that you get. you know um I had a friend that would do that, and he gave me a burnt umber. It's the best burnt umber I ever had in my life. And I have like, I'm sorry, it's a raw umber, and I still saved like the smallest amount of raw umber, just like as a just in case. I'll never end up using it because of that, of course, because it's so wonderful to work with. But if you have the time, why not? you know I
I wonder is it economical to do that?
the
Or
pigment itself is pretty, it's not too bad. And it gives you a greater range of control over things. It's kind of like, you know it's like we were talking about before, why people like certain brands over other brands. Like I have a friend who loves Sennelier oil paint, and another one who absolutely hates it because it's too oily. But my other friend really likes it because it is kind of oily, and he finds like stuff like Utrecht or um, Gambling a little bit too stiff uh, because they put too much aluminum in it. And you know it allows you to control the properties over it. But again, it's like, hey, as long as you're having fun, whatever helps you make the best work possible. That's what I say. But I personally, I found the paint that I like. I like a lot of Winsor Newton paints. It's just my preference.
I like Winsor Newton, but I'm not. I use a lot of medium, so it changes. It kind of balances everything out. Uh,
Right, right.
so it doesn't make that much difference. Got a response back. It's greatly economical
Yeah.
to make your own paints. Um, I I always get a thinking about buying paint. I always laugh at George Pratt, who will buy when he comes to the academy, he buys the most expensive paint he could put his hands on. And John, I need these for my demo. And then but I really got it when Francis Livingston came, and first time he did a demo for us, we went to the art supply store, and we purchased all this paint, and he squeezed out every tube, like just emptied it out.
Oh
And
my God.
I was just in shock, and I was like, "Are you really going to use all that?" And he goes, "I'm not sure, but I might."
Oh
And he
my
ended up
God.
using a lot of it.
Wow. Hey,
Uh,
good for him, man.
that guy uses material.
Yeah. Talk about there are paintings you see in person that are just um
Yeah, they're different. They're
put the reproductions to shame. And I could tell you Francis Livingston is one of those artists who are just like that. The work is stunning to look at on a screen, on a computer screen, and then to see them in real life is just, oh man.
well, the artists that you think of artists, like in history that did that. I mean, you see a Bonnard. Oh my God. Uh,
Yeah,
there's a
it's no
lot
joke.
going on there. There's stuff you
It
don't
is.
see that's in the books.
Nope, nope. I saw a whole show of his uh, at the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, and it was. I walked into it not knowing. I knew Bonnard, but and actually it was because I had watched a video of your dad, John, talking about how Bernard had influenced him. And I was like, you know what? If Mark English says that it's probably a good idea to take a look at Bernard, then I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I said, well, what do you know? I'm in Paris and there's a whole Bernard, retrospective show. And man, I walked out of that show a changed artist. I mean,
Yeah. There's
there's
a
a luminescence to it. It's kind of hard to describe.
yeah, there's a few that have done that to me. Happened to me at the New Museum. Sterling and I last January went and spent a day in the New Museum just looking at. There was only 14 or 15 paintings, Gustav Klimt's,
Wow.
uh, and it entertained me for the whole day. I just it was absolutely amazing.
That's a I forgot. Oh man, when museums open back up, I need to do that on my way to the Met. So it's the new museum is not the new
No,
NEW, folks. It's NEIU.
yeah, right across from the Met.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
great stuff.
Yeah, they have a floor of Egon Schiele drawings that they
Oh my
generally had
god.
open, and that's what we went for. And they were working on it. It was closed. They said, hey, they just opened up the second floor. They had just opened up with the 15, 14 or 15 Klimts, and they were
Wow,
and there were 5 or 6 landscapes there that I hadn't seen before, and they just crushed me.
wow.
Worth every penny. And
I
the interesting
yeah.
part was they were remodeling. They were redoing the bookstore, and so they had like every book that they were adding new books in. So I had all these books. They were like $4 and $5 a piece. Um, I think I bought enough that about as many as I could carry home.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I would have been broke.
Well, not for
Yeah.
$4 or $5 a piece.
No, I would have bought the whole store out. Just like sure, why not? Sure, why not? And then realize I had to walk around Manhattan with 85 pounds of books.
The joke's on you.
I know, right? Yeah, I think one of the best shows I. Oh, by the way, this is an example of me mixing one of these things right here. So I like to mix it up and then just put it off to the side.
That's great. I mean, the continuity and the harmonization, just because you're doing that with the same colors, um, keeps things
Right.
close together.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope. So, are there any questions, John? I hope
I've
I'm.
been I've been asking them as they
Okay,
go up.
cool. I hope this is somewhat interesting. I'm going to try and progress as quickly as possible through this thing. How much time? How am I doing on time?
We got an hour and a few minutes.
Great. Okay. So I'm just going to progress through this. Green is probably one of the most difficult colors uh, to mix or to get it so that you don't have. It's hard to make a lot of variety from it at first when you're first doing things. Um, and there's a lot of green in this. There's like subtle hue shifts. What I mean by hue is just the color. You know, sometimes it's kind of blue green, sometimes it's yellow green, sometimes it's kind of like this orange, red orange infused with green, or like a yellow orange. And what I like to do is just sort of place these tiles as accurate as I can, and then try and cover the whole piece. And you're going to see there's little parts that I'm leaving out. Uh, Little parts of the underpainting showing through. Now, I could design, have I designed it in the past where I've done that? I've left a lot of it. Sometimes, yeah. Could you? Absolutely. There's nothing saying that if you can't. I just kind of let as all I'm looking for is just to nail the right value first, which is 100% the most important thing. I think high number one on the list, and then temperature, and then the color itself. Yeah, in that order for me. So I've got to make it cool. If it's the right,
What makes green so difficult?
I think it's because when people think of green, they think, you know,
I have my theory.
something like this, or people usually go for like a convenience color and mix to it. I found that it was most difficult. People, I ran that into that when I was learning landscape painting and realizing that everything's not the same green. But yeah, I want to listen to your theory, John.
My theory is I've artists that have said that if I could just understand how to use green, they'd be happy. Um, but to me, the reason it gives people difficulty is because it falls very quickly. It's like the ultimate gray. It changes temperature so fast.
Yeah,
A little bit of blue, it falls into the blue side. A little bit of orange or red or yellow, it falls into the warm side,
right.
and they lose track of it. I mean, they don't realize how much it's changing it. Um, but it does.
Yeah,
It changes temperature really, really fast.
yeah, yeah. You're right. Totally right. That's it. And you just gotta. I think the thing with it is just don't lose sight of the fact that you have to nail your values. And I'll tell you what, this underpainting right here is making life a lot easier for me because I'm mixing off of something and I'm matching things that are pretty close to the values that I want anyway. So if it was off of white, it'd be a lot more difficult, or just a overall color, be a lot more difficult for me to assess whether or not a value that I'm putting on is correct. So it's the reason why I like to paint with some sort of underpainting, a layout of my values, no
I do.
matter how tight or.
I don't like painting against white canvas at all. Um, I I'll if
Yeah.
when my idea of starting white is doing an acrylic underpainting to get my value structure right
Yeah, ditto. Yeah.
before I start with oils. Um,
I
the
found, I there's, and I've met some painters that, and I've read about painters too that that love starting in white because they feel that it gives you the truest color, and your colors don't get bogged down by the gray of an underpainting or something like that. Um, but I just find myself, especially when I'm painting in oils, I find myself fighting the white if I don't cover it.
Right.
Um,
Well,
and when it peeks through,
it influences your painting in a huge way
yeah,
because it's so
yeah,
bright. It's like try painting against black. You're going to
exactly,
do a dark painting.
yeah, and that could work to your advantage if you wanted to. It's just
right.
you, you know the thing is I know what it does to my painting experience, and I have to decide whether or not I like that,
Yeah.
and sometimes a lot of times I don't. Now I will start with white if I am doing an underpainting where I'm applying a wash of oils or gouache and lifting out, establishing my values by removing the paint. And then that gives me a lot of value range. But yeah,
The one person I probably paint with the most, like together, and which is not that much, just when we're doing the academy, is George. And he's the exact opposite of me. He starts against white and he scrubs in, he creates this chaos that I just don't want to deal with. He scrubs in, like he has this rainbow of colors. He'll put 25 colors out on his palette and
yeah,
arbitrarily starts throwing color everywhere. And then the whole idea is to rein it in
yeah.
and to
Wow.
control the chaos. And I'm just like, oh man, that would be the end of me. I just don't want to think about that.
Yeah, yeah. It's really interesting, right? It's like how different artists work in that vein. Like it makes total sense to someone like George. I've messed around with stuff like that. I found for me that my there's enough chaos in my brain. I don't need it on my painting. It's just I'm chaotic as it is, and there are times like I've experimented with it and it's really nice. I just find myself just saying like, why didn't I just start with a tighter drawing? I like I like I like some people like starting with chaos and then bringing in control. I actually like starting controlled and then bringing in the chaos where I want it. Um, but that also change that could depend on the pieces that I'm working with, but that's usually the case for me. Uh,
Well, I work that way in drawing for sure. It's like start from the vague and work to the specific,
right.
and try to control. I've watched you paint in isolation, and it's kind of a chaotic start that you have. And
Right, totally.
you
Yeah.
start you go after the big shapes and start reining in.
Right, right. Yeah. Yeah. And I guess it's like with something like as simple as a head, it I could just work on kind of the abstract a little bit more. Um, I say I say it almost very much in a admiration of people like George, in the sense that like I wish I could work a little bit more chaotic in my work. It's just understanding how to control it enough or guide it to where I need to get the results that I want. Um,
Now, here's a good question for you. Do you back away or back up from your painting or look at it small in your phone regularly?
yeah, yeah, I take a lot of photos of my paintings consistently just to track my progress and also just to take a look at it from a different vantage point. I'll also what I'll do is take it, yeah, back up. I'll look at it in the screen that I'm doing right now to see if it looks okay. Doesn't look like much, so we'll hopefully get it so that it does. Um, yeah, I do all that stuff. Yeah, backing up is key,
Yeah.
especially if you're when you're working long stretches on this. Demos are tough because you got to create something quick. Um, but I'll lean back when I can. It's just
I
a part of it.
find myself, Ray, a lot in our drawing nights is that when I get done and I'll think, okay, I've taken it this far. How far do I have to take it? How far do I want to go? And so I'll take photographs of it, number one, to see it small, to see how I like it small and see it in a different way, which is
Hmm.
very helpful,
Yeah.
which I never did before. I just gotten in the habit of it. And but I I have record of it before I actually go too far. That's the
Right. Yeah, it's like shouldn't have done that. This
oops.
like, do you remember that time when you were happy? You know,
Yeah, yeah.
just
But that
hold on to that.
sure. Well, I don't know why I ruined my happiness.
God, John, if I had an answer for you, believe me, I would have given you, but I can't even figure that out for myself. It's like, oh, too much, you know. I and that's why, this actually kind of leads to how I try and prevent myself from or limiting those major catastrophes. I think I learned a ton from that stuff when I wreck a piece. Um, but I try and because I'm dealing with deadlines a lot. I mean, like I have to just produce paintings, and so it's hard to experiment when you really need some work that's to produce work that's made well enough to hang on gallery walls and hopefully someone's home. And so I'm trying to get a lot of that experimentation, uh, as close as possible to it, though not a good replacement, through the use of like doing studies and then furthering those studies digitally, and really working them up like I did for that rose piece, to try and get some of that chaos back into the work, that freshness, because that's difficult. I mean, I think you and I were talking about that in terms of the Nikolai Feshin, especially the drawings.
Yeah,
And I saw a lot of people in the inspiration. I saw somebody had posted a bunch of Feshin's paintings in the inspiration
that was me.
channel. Oh, that's great. Yeah, those are great.
Drawings first, then paintings, and I got the response, which was good because uh, a few people stepped in and said, "Yeah, I really like his drawings more than I do his paintings." And I was that way for a long period of time, and I
Hmm.
still like his drawings better than his paintings. But I have come to admire his paintings a lot. Uh,
Yeah.
uh, so some of them are too. Uh, I don't know. There, some of them. Who am I to say? It's Nikolai Fechin. I'm not going to say anything bad about him. There's nothing bad about him. There's
Right.
just a choice. Um, some of them are, a lot of mark making that seems overdone.
Yeah. Yeah. And he even, I mean, there's a artist. Do you know? Do you happen to know Warren Chang by any chance?
No,
So he's an illustrator in San Francisco. He's a painter. Does these like beautiful, incredible scenes of like migrant workers and around Monterey. But he used to do. He was an illustrator for Atari for a while and did move to New York and studied with Max Ginsberg and did a lot of paperback stuff and
hmm,
um, great, really. I mean, one of the nicest people in the world. And so Warren has this incredible studio in Monterey, and I remember visiting him, and we were talking about. I was in town, and my cousin, my mother, for her 60th, and my wife were all running the Monterey Half Marathon, and I went with them, and I trained really hard to run the 5K.
no.
Um,
I was gonna say 10K.
yeah. I mean, yeah. Timmy, edit that in. I said 10 instead of 5. Uh, and so when they were running, which by the way, the 5K went through some of the most beautiful parts of the half marathon. So I got to see all the good stuff. I joke, why they had to suffer through it. But, I went to while they were running, I went to his, I called him up and I went to his studio because he was a teacher at the Academy of Art at the time. And, we were talking. He's got an encyclopedic brain for art history, and we were talking a lot about. We were looking through some John Buscema drawings. He had actual original John Buscema's, um, and he was saying like him, he was talking about how much John Buscema had influenced him, and also Nikolai Feshin, and we were talking about Feshin's drawings versus the paintings, and he said the same thing, and I definitely agreed. And I said, I wonder why it's so hard to control the chaos. And apparently Fetchin, had written his teacher, mentor, Ilya Repin, and about the same thing, saying that it's hard for him to control the chaos when he's introducing more and more elements, because it's putting more of a strain on the abstraction. And so, I always found that interesting. But yeah, people like Richard Diebenkorn that do it like incredibly, just incredibly proficient. Um,
Here's a good question. When do you seek others' opinions of your work as you are doing a painting? And then says, my wife chimes in whether I want it or not, and sadly, she's right. I have one of those too,
yeah,
but I refuse to admit she's right.
right. um, Usually when a piece is, I you know, I, early on when I was when I graduated school, I was very much. It was hard for me. I'm very obviously. I'm first and foremost. You got to be your own worst critic. I think at least for me, I'm my own worst critic. I should preface that. I'm my own worst critic, and so I'm always constantly comparing myself to my heroes and trying to. I mean, hope is a fool's errand in many ways, but hope to get something that's passable, when compared to them. So I'm always comparing composition, always comparing brushstrokes, always comparing everything that I do against them. And so a lot of times that feedback helps me and my knowledge of just being able to deconstruct what it is that they're doing. And that's just because I had great teachers that helped me do that. It allowed me to be my own, like a different set of eyes. That being said, when I am at my wit's end on a piece, especially early on, it happened to me. When I first graduated, I would usually ask my good friend Tyler Jacobson for help, because he's a set of eyes that I always trusted. And with my wife, if she'll never say that the painting is bad. She'll she just she's got subtle reactions to things. So she's not excited about something, I know I can make it better. And at least in my head, I mean, mind you, there could be any reason why, like, she could be tired or doing something, or it's 3 a.m. and I'm bothering her to come see a painting, even though I don't do that anymore. Um, but so yeah, that's usually when I'm kind of at my about to either I'm at my wit's end on a piece, or I'm at a point in a piece where I don't know what to do. And a lot of times in illustration, I think it's always been a really great help, because um, with Tyler, because I trust him, and you know him and I don't have any egos. When there's just full trust. He could say whatever he wants, and I could say whatever I want on his piece, and we're not going to get angry or frustrated at each other. And that's great. I feel really fortunate that I have that. And the great thing about the things like that is that, or today, working today, is that you can say, hey, yeah, I could take a look at the piece and maybe make some suggestions, and you could literally work over the piece digitally and then send it back to them. And like, here's my idea, do with it, what you want. And it's really served me well. But
So have your support system. Um,
yeah, so have your support system. Yeah.
and I know I had mine, and still do. Everybody should seek that out, and try to find that support system. And obviously, My father was really important to me. Brent Watkinson was really important to me. George became really important to me. John Foster, um, and uh, people, Chris Payne. I mean, others that that the information was really really important. But there was always, like there's always that, like you mentioned with Tyler. You have that one or two people that you rely on. That's great, and I think there's another there's another part of it though, and that is the looking and the inspirational aspect of it, of going to museums and
Mm-hmm.
look and you know any artist I know, if there's a fire, it's going to be a real question: do they grab their work or do they grab their books? And um, books to an artist, and it may be different in because of the internet and accessibility to search artists online. Um, Maybe it's how you filed them or how you continually use them, but that I think is just as important. Is go walking in. I used to love walking into my dad's studio. Just in the last few years, um, in the last 5 or 6 years, is he would have books laying open while he was painting of artists that he was looking at, and he would just have them laying all over the floor, and he was just using them as inspiration, as things that inspired him. Um,
Yeah, if there's a fire, John, I'm maybe picking one painting. I'm grabbing one painting. It's 40 by 60, and it's only because it's a painting that I'm not going to sell and it has to do with my family, and the rest are my books. I'm going to stack my books on the 40 by 60 painting and run out of there, you know?
well, if that happens to me, it's not my artwork I'm stealing. I'm taking.
Right. You're right. Oh my
I
God.
got a
Yeah.
few that I'm really fond of, that it's like, I'm
Yeah,
grabbing his.
you're right.
I can
You're
make
right.
more of my own.
Yeah,
Um,
it's right. It's like yeah. I had said that to I think my mother, and she was like, "Really? You wouldn't save your pieces?" It goes, "No, I know the guy that makes the pieces. He can make more for me if if I want. He can make as much as I want.
there was this joke my dad and I had, like moving his artwork around, or our artwork around, and people would, like he would just have stacks of it all over his studio in frames. And they said, like, God, you let people just like cull through this work and look at it. And he's like, yeah, he goes, I get really tense about him screwing the frames up, because I can fix the paintings real easy, but I
Right.
can't fix the
You
frame.
can't fix the frames. Oh my God, it's
I
so
got to
true.
take them back to the frame.
Oh no, yeah. Oh my God.
He was
I he's oh man, yeah. I totally can relate to that. It's like, oh yeah, I feel that sentiment for sure. And also the idea of like, I think what you had said was super important about understanding, exposing yourself to as much artwork as possible, like good examples, of really solid examples of art. And I think one thing, Tyler and I have talked about this a ton, and we just keep saying it every time people ask us questions about, improving and stuff. It's like you cannot work in a vacuum. You just can't. Um, there's just too you can learn. There's too much to learn, and stuff that you don't have to struggle to, and through in order to that you're just it's just foolish to think that you could make something completely original, you know, uh, without looking at like centuries of work, having using that resource. Um, yeah, I just think that
Oh,
the
it's a
growth
respect.
is,
I remember Gary Kelly having a conversation with somebody who's saying, "Well, I don't want to look at be influenced by somebody's work, because I want to be more original on my own." And Gary said, "That's not going to happen." And the person argued back and said, "Well, why not?" He said, "You're going to have to know what's been done in front of you to know that if you are imitating somebody." He said,
that's yeah,
you gotta, that's your job as an artist, to know what came before you, and it's going to help you both directions. It's going to help
that's
you
such a
identify yourself, and it's going to help you know what's already been done out there."
That's such a great way of putting it. Oh man, I gotta steal that from Gary. Nobody tell him I did that. I'm gonna do that. That's great. Yeah. Yeah, seriously. It's yeah, and having a variety too, I think is helpful too. Like not putting all your not thinking that one artist is going to fulfill everything. I think is super important too, and to not falling into the imitationness category.
Right.
Um, I mean, I just was never.
Well, there's a time and place. I think it's really
Yeah.
important to learn through other artists. I think it's great. If you can imitate somebody, that means you understand what they're doing.
Right. Right.
And and I
Right.
think that's really healthy while you're learning.
Yeah. Totally.
To get away from it is becomes critical at a certain time because they've already done that.
Right.
So you can't be somebody else. And um, certainly as an illustrator, um,
Yeah. Yeah.
a lot of people try and then they figure out that they'll never get they don't get that far just being an imitator.
And because you're never gonna get it, you're just always gonna be behind because you're just chasing something.
Right.
But as a learning tool, yeah. I mean, I used to. I mean, that's one of the things that helped me get faster with digital painting so quickly is I would do master copies of traditional paintings digitally,
Yeah.
and copy brushstrokes and copy just mannerisms and things like that. I mean, there's a lot of Dean Cornwell in my strokes, or at least I think about him, Frank Brangwyn, and a billion other artists. Uh,
Do you look at Duvenek a lot?
oh my God, yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah. He's I found out about him through one of my old teachers, Mark Tennant,
Hmm.
initially.
I learned Duvenek from Lipke.
Oh wow,
Told me it was one of his biggest influences. He said
yeah.
Velasquez and Duvenek,
Greg,
Frank
Greg,
Duvenek were the that
well, Greg
influenced.
Manchus is the one that told me you need to look at Frank Duvenek, and I was like, oh, I think I heard of that guy. Yeah, 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 yeah. And then of course, San Francisco has a bunch of like his famous ones, but
Right.
yeah. So Skip Lipke said Velasquez and Duvenek. I could totally
Yeah.
see that. Yeah, no, yeah. I love his work. I love Velasquez, of course, and
Then obviously, I mean, there's so many others. I mean,
there's so many others. You
Whistler,
know. Oh yeah.
obviously
You ever
with
see you ever see that room that he designed? I forgot where it is. I think it's at the Met. He did like an interior decoration of this room, and it was all based off of like a peacock, and everything was like this beautiful blues and
huh.
greens. It was incredible, and I was like, Whistler designed a room, an entire like area for people. You know, uh,
Okay, here's a question. You consciously develop your style, or does that come more naturally out of the process? Does illustration demand more of a distinct style than fine art?
I think in well, I'll kind of answer it kind of backwards in a sense. In fine art, you would think that there wouldn't be a concern of having your own style, but there's a huge concern in having your own style. I like to call it voice though, because it's not just a way of you apply your paint, it's the way you express yourself. And I think the same thing happens in illustration. A lot of us, when we're in school, we're stressed out about that because we wanted our work to be recognizable. And um and so the thing is, we've only been really studying for 4 years, and it's tough. So the first thing, what do you do in 4 years to be completely original, recognizable? You go find someone else's style that you can kind of do well and slap together a couple of things that kind of sort of look like something and hope for the best. Um, but while you're doing that, it kind of goes back to what is exactly what we were talking about, what John and I were just talking about. you start to recognize yourself as you study more and more and more and more. And in fine arts, the same thing. It's you can, there's plenty of styles you can go and ape, but do you really, you have to ask yourself, do you really want to spend the rest of your life imitating someone? There's so many easier ways of making a living, than selling paintings. And I would rather not be miserable doing it. So uh, I think it's the same. I don't see a difference in the demands, I found in my experience. But um, what do you think, John? I mean, you've
No, I I think illustration is probably it's more important to distinguish yourself. The idea of getting your work from a group of people that are buying what you do. Um, you can be, in the painting world, you could have great facilitation. You could do something like other people do at a high level, and people appreciate it. And it's like, why does it's a different. You can get really deep with this, but um, why why in music can they recreate classics? The same musicians recreate it over and over again and be really considered great just because of their facilitation to be able to do that.
right,
Um,
right,
they
right.
play classics. As a painter, the painting world has gotten out of hand. It's like it changes so quickly and moves so fast that you have to be inventing something all the time. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I think, especially with the last 15 years, the interest in representational and figurative painting again. Um, but identifying yourself as an illustrator, the main reason for doing it is your ultimate goal is to make an art director remember you for what you do, to be hired. And if you can establish, that power of, seeing Victor Nye or Chris Payne or a Gary Kelly or a Mark English or a Howard Pyle, whoever it is, it's their work without seeing that credit on it. There's something that holds it all together, and it's because you're making work for somebody else. You're doing it the other way around as a painter. People are
Yeah,
buying it after you've done it, and you're solving somebody else's problem as an illustrator, and they want to know what's going to happen. They want to have an idea of what you're going to do with it before they hire you.
right.
So I think it becomes essential just in the industry to identify yourself.
And I will say, I think that you can be extremely technically proficient and not have any recognizable style and still get a job, but that's probably going to be more of a studio job, and a
Oh,
lot of my friends went to studios and their work is unrecognizable. If you were to put down their work, they really didn't have a style. It was more of like a house style that kind of everybody worked in. Um, so, you can have a house style, in gallery painting. I know there's a house style in certain camps with like painterly realism
yeah,
and all
sure.
that stuff. And like you were saying, John, if you can do that pretty well, then, you can make a living doing it, no problem. But I think that's what, you know, if you want to set yourself apart, I think that's the big thing too, right? It's like you have to have your own voice. And when you see a Chris Payne, or a Gary Kelly, you're not going to mix them up. um
And an art director's got that saved in the back of their head.
right,
It's in their memory, and they know where to go when they want when they trying to align a story or an intellectual property with an artist. They know what that individual does. So it's very helpful in that way. Getting there becomes the question. How
right,
do you develop that?
yeah,
So Ray,
that's
go ahead and answer that. Cheers.
so, it's a lot of study, a lot of work, a lot of, we you get into, you got to do your homework on yourself too, and you have to ask yourself what you like You also have to see as an artist what you like versus what the industry is calling for. What are the demands? Um, you have to understand that illustration, and John said this tons of times. Um, illustration is a constantly changing environment. I mean, illustration 20 years ago and illustration today are completely different industries. Uh, Heck, even 10 years. Um, and it's going to keep evolving, and so you have to figure out where your work, um, where there's interest in the type of work that you do, and look at all the avenues, because I used to think that, like, oh, I want to have a career like Bernie Fuchs. In school I used to think, or like Meet Schaefer. You're not gonna, that industry has been dead for 50 years. There's no jobs like that anymore. The magazines, those back in the days when the magazines were had tons of, huge budgets, and were using illustrators all the time, for all these spreads and stuff, and you had a lot of time and so on and so forth. Or like a movie poster comps, like, oh, I want to have a career like Drew Struzan. Like, illustrated movie posters aren't in demand now. So how do you go about, let's say you want to do that, well, how do you go about, what are the avenues that you could use to support yourself? And that just takes time. You have to ask yourself those hard questions, like what it is that you want to do. Because it's my opinion, you're going to spend a lot of time doing it, and you're going to be by yourself, and you're going to have to sacrifice a lot for it. So it's my opinion that I have to me personally make it worth it, uh, because I don't want to have a 30-year career or something and look back and regret that I didn't do X, Y, and Z.
Right.
It's like one of my biggest fears, because I've met illustrators and artists that have done that, and that just breaks my heart.
Right. Interesting. Happens a lot in portfolio reviews I have, right? I ask, well, what's your situation? Are you trying to do this right now? Are you actively pursuing? Are you having any success? And then where do you live? And
Yeah.
and a lot of it has to do just determining, okay, well, am I going to be able to do this freelance, or going to be able to do this in a studio? Am I going to have to relocate?
Right.
Um, what are the skill sets I'm going to have to require to work in that part of the? I mean, you got to look at outcomes. You got to look at big picture first. I mean, um, if you want to work, get a job in a studio, you're going to have, the basic. You just look at the needs of the studios that they put out there, what they're looking for. I mean,
Right.
you're playing their game. If you want to work as you have more freedom as a freelance illustrator. Um, you got to be very I mean, one of the payoffs is the freedom, and um, but there's a lot of things you're going to have to consider to be able to to work as a freelance illustrator. Um, the painting world, you better start researching galleries and figure out, or maybe it's not galleries, maybe it's selling things, through your social media and through everyday originals, and
Exactly. Right.
maybe it's a whole different approach to it. But you better think about your outcomes and how you're going to position yourself to succeed there. um, your skill sets have to relate to those things. It's part of what we do teaching all the time is like trying to align people with the right artists so they can talk to professionals that are doing it.
Right.
And that's a huge thing. Um,
Yeah. It's yeah. It's
that's
like,
why you're here, Ray.
yeah. It's like, what do we ask Ray? Well, you do that thing
You-
pretty
you-
well, I guess.
but you're calculated with what
Right.
you've been
Right.
really calculated about how you're operating your career and pursuing
Yeah.
your.
Yeah. Yeah. And that came from just, uh, you know, me realizing that there's, the type of illustration work that I had wanted to do, or the type of work that I wanted to do, kind of didn't exist. And to the extent that I was going to be able to necessarily support myself, or the interest and the budgets weren't necessarily there. And I didn't have to put all my eggs in one basket. I could do paintings, and I can illustrate. I could still illustrate, and then um, I could do my own paintings. Like, I mean, you can ask, John, you bring that up about, like, now that representational art is a lot more in fashion now. It's a lot more acceptable, and there's a big resurgence to it. I mean, like, just ask John. People, like, in the 80s, 90s,
Couldn't do it when I got out of
couldn't
school.
do it.
No,
Couldn't do it.
I remember trying, looking and trying to figure out where to do it. It's when actually, I got to give him a lot of credit. It's when I saw Lipke, and I was just like, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I heard his explanation of how he was doing it. I was like, that totally makes sense to me. And it changed how I approached.
But yeah, I mean, you look at, just like the round of those types of artists, I mean, even a little bit before him, like Bert Silverman and David Levine, and
Yeah.
you that was like, they were the exceptions to the rules, and then slowly but surely it started happening. But if you look at illustration, it's a really great point. If you look at, Lipke's illustrations, they look like paintings, that
Yeah.
hang in galleries now. Like, they don't.
They
I
don't look
mean,
any they don't look any well, because they're famous, a lot of them were famous people, but
right,
they don't look it didn't look any different. In fact, some of that stuff I like better than what he does now.
right,
With um, they don't look that much different.
right. It's like that, or, I'm thinking of, like, a artist like Camille Peswetic. I think I'm saying her name right. Um, she's a landscape painter, but she had a long illustration career, or Francis, Francis Livingston, like, you see some of their work, and you just like, okay, you take out, like, John, if you would take that Wyatt Earp, or like the that it's like a blood, it's not a blood, is it a bloodhound, that dog that was on the couch,
Right.
that piece, like, you take out the copy for that painting, that looks like a gallery painting today, you know and it's amazing how perceptions have shifted, and they're going to continue shifting. And but
No, it was really interesting, right? I was at the right time to do that type of work as an illustrator, that I could be super busy, and then and then it's like it everything became, uh, started becoming much more conceptual, and I didn't wanna go there. I
right,
tried it, but I was, like, doing things that I wasn't really that interested in doing, and then I saw other artists that were kinda at the same place, and they just said, "Well, this is working for me pretty well over here," and I saw, well, Heindel, and
right,
Heindel did it in a way that nobody else did it. I mean, he wasn't relying on gallery. He was making his own shows. He was attaching him to dance companies, and he
right.
used the mailing list of the dance company. That's got to be Bill Cobb. He's done with here. I knew it. But it worked perfectly for him. You know.
Right. And you
That's
just brought that's like, I was hoping that you were going to bring up Bob Heindel, because that's an example of someone saying, I like to do this type of work. How do I get the biggest audience and surround myself with people that will support me by getting this type of work, And it
right.
doesn't have to be the traditional market, in a sense. And it reminds me of, like, Ashley Levitt's, career, like,
Yeah. Very similar.
just incredible.
Yeah, Heindel said something to me that I mean, it made me think. He said the most important part of it is you have to be comfortable with it as an artist. You have to be willing to go for a long period of time where you're going to be interested with that subject matter. If you're going to invest that much time and energy in developing around a bunch of paintings ballerinas.
Right.
Basically, he was saying, I think that subject matter could interest me my whole life. It's got so much uh, diversity to it and so many different options to it. So, I mean, he definitely put a lot of thought into it for sure.
Absolutely. That doesn't come, that's kind of what I was very clumsily like trying to explain when I said, when somebody asks, how do you go about doing that? Finding your style and stuff, and saying that you got to ask yourself a lot of questions and things like that. I mean, but it's really, finding that thing that you really, what do you on, truly, what truly interests you, that's a tough question. But if
Yeah.
you stick it out, you could start to find an audience then, because it's just an audience for everything.
There is.
Ash.
It's interesting that, like, with illustration right now, it's like you have to have, it's an assumption you have your skill set, you have the craft, the skill, um, you know how to solve problems and the process and the way it's produced, and you understand the industry really well. And it
Right.
works the same way as the painting. And the painting thing, though, is a little bit more difficult because there's a lot more variety. There's a lot more, there's all kinds of different, galleries. There's no rhyme or reason. Like, if you put them all together, they have all kinds of different business plans. Uh,
Totally.
and some are tourist galleries, some are collectors galleries, some are blue chip galleries. I mean,
Right.
you know, uh, some are only open a couple of times, a couple of months out of the year. You got to really pay attention to all that stuff and figure out how you can fit into it and work. You know, if you want to be in that gallery, you got to figure out how you can work within their model. And then
Right.
you also got to decide if you want to be in that gallery. Do
Right.
you put your work hanging next to the other artists in that gallery?
Right.
That's
Right.
the thing, that usually the big one.
Yeah. And I think that's the trick to all of that stuff is you have to, this goes back to what you were saying about researching and trying to have a game plan going through it, because you could waste a lot of time pursuing something that's ultimately not going to yield anything beneficial to your career, because it's like you can, it's what you were saying about, galleries is a classic example of that. Like, you have to research um the galleries that you're going to be showing in, the artists that are there, and you have to ask yourself, will my work fit in there? And the good galleries will tell you yay or nay, but at the same time, you also have, let's say you get into a good gallery, um, you might not be selling work, um, and your work might be pushed in a direction that you might not want. So you have to be really, really conscious of that too. It's
There's
not it's not any easier.
there's so
Yeah.
many ways of looking at that. I got to bring this up as just an unbelievable example. A gallery that represented me in Telluride. It's now changed owners, but the they ended up representing about, probably was probably in the gallery 3 years before my father came into it, and then about a year and a half, 2 years after that, Bernie came into it. And another smart decision on my part of introducing the gallery owner to those two guys. I got about half the wall space when they showed up. Um,
Right.
so, but there was a a local. This was in Telluride, Colorado. It's a ski town, and they did really well 2 months in the winter and 2 months in the summer, and the rest of the year they didn't do so well, especially
Right.
at that time, because it's much more populated now than it was when I started there. And but there was a painter, and I'd go, and this is before I was in the gallery. I saw this guy every time I would go out there and ski and be in Telluride. I would, and no matter summer or winter, this guy would be on the same corner doing the same painting of the same thing. His model, his business model, was to do this painting and to sell it to a tourist for $100.
Wow.
That's how he started it. And he sold his painting that he did every day religiously. Somebody always bought it.
Wow.
That painting became, this was 10 years later, he was still doing the same thing, but he had switched in the off season. He had a place that he would go to, and like in Costa Rica, and do the exact same thing with a gallery, do a painting of the scene and sell it for, it's probably $400 or $500 at the time.
Wow.
But he was selling his painting. He had no representation in a gallery, but he would sell his painting on the street at this was 10 years later for $400 or $500 to somebody that was just stood there and watched him paint it.
Wow.
And when you think about that's a pretty good gig.
Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah.
John, I'm going to chime in for two very apt reasons. One, have you ever heard the Dimitri Martin joke, which is when I was in college, I could ride a unicycle and I'd ride it across campus and I'd think, hey, I'm the only guy who can ride a unicycle, when I should have been thinking, I'm the only guy riding a unicycle. So like knowing where, sometimes it's good to stick out, sometimes it's not. But on the note of and knowing when the differences can be very subjective. But on what you're talking about, John, what's really wild, I read an article in the New York Times yesterday titled "The Painters Subverting Art World Economics," and it's about an artist named let me make sure I get her name right. It's like a very similar story. Jean Smith. She does a portrait a day, and she's been known to, she posts it, sells it on Facebook for $100 immediately, within seconds of posting it. And her like commitment is she's never going to sell them for more than $100. And it's super interesting because people are like hawks on her Facebook page now. I can only imagine the article was from like, they said it was insane in the article, like how intensely people collect them. She's banned people from buying them. She doesn't want, because there's like somebody owns over 100 of them.
Oh yeah.
And so she like said, you can't buy my artwork anymore, from her at least.
That's interesting.
Wow.
But it's like really weird. It's kind of thoughtful. You should check out her work, because I was looking at it. I'm sure it's insane now to try and get them, just because that came out last week. So I gotta imagine she's got a lot more attention. But that kind of reminds me of that. It's the same like hustle mentality. Is the ski slopes painter.
Put a very low ceiling on it. That she'll figure. I mean, she's that bright. She'll figure out a way to change that in some way.
I honestly, John, I think she's doing it for like 10 years. I think she just like posts more portraits per day. But like there's a real there appears to be like this like weird like flea market commitment to her pricing. It's super interesting.
There's artists that we know. You know who Nicholas, I don't know if he pronounces it Uribe or
Uribe, yeah.
Uribe,
yeah.
He does a very similar thing with selling it. Yep. He tries to sell everything he does, and it's not expensive, $200 or $300.
No, it should be probably 10 times that amount.
Oh, I know. He's incredibly good.
Yeah.
John Foster and I were having a conversation. Oh, thank you, Timmy. John Foster and I were just having this conversation. John's like, that's what I'm doing. That's what I want to do. He goes, I want to just sell, do a painting every day, sell it for $200, $200 or $300. And there's people that are pulling it off, and you do the math on it, $8,000 or $9,000. I mean, if you're selling one a day, for $300, you're doing $9,000 a month.
Yeah, and also he lives in Bogota, Colombia too, and that that money goes way
Long way.
longer,
Yeah.
so
But
that's a big thing.
and the only reason I'm mentioning that is there's, and Timmy, thank you for saying that, is there is lots of different opportunities and different ways to do it. I've seen people that have discovered ways of selling artwork. It's pretty creative. Sometimes I don't like their artwork very much, but
Right.
they found really good ways to sell it and monetize it. Um,
Well,
you
we
know,
were just talking about Leroy
Yeah.
Neiman.
yeah.
The only thing I often, and I just think of it, this is more of an entrepreneurial, and I don't want to chime in too much, but the entrepreneurial perspective is like, it can be really exciting to be the first person to do something. But I think sometimes it can be naive to think that you're at the cut. Like, oftentimes, if no one is doing it, that
That's
might
a good
not be
reason.
that might not be a good sign. Not always, though,
How do you tell the guys that were there first? They're the ones with the arrows in their back.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, totally. And but for every one of those stories, there's like there's a Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
Right.
And so you can't say it doesn't happen. It's just
Hey Ray, I haven't said anything about your painting in a long time, and it's looking great.
Oh, well, I'm glad it is. I'm like
You got 10
taking up the
minutes. But
time and trying to, yeah. Can we, well, because I feel bad that I have to go grab the my matte medium. Would I be able to add an extra 5-10 minutes?
absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Because
The
like
rest of the demo is going to be a time lapse screen. No. Yeah.
So what I've been doing is essentially surrounding my painting with my colors, and now I'm basically working dark to light. So I am now going into the lights and starting to warm things up, and I'm using what I've placed down to kind of frame my lights, but I'm going to kind of block things in. You could still see that there are areas where I haven't filled them in. I don't feel compelled to do that right now. I want to kind of hold on to that color or that underpainting as long as I need to, because it's there and the shapes are there and the values there the way I want it. So I'm basically just sort of colorizing these areas and placing things in. I've switched to a smaller brush because they're smaller shapes. If it's a larger brush, I'll pick larger shapes. Um, I like to use larger brushes for large shapes and smaller brushes for smaller shapes. Sometimes, a lot of times, most of the times, but there are times where I'll use a super small brush. Maybe to create maybe a textural effect of broken color or something like that, if I feel that the painting kind of needs it. But
it's interesting. Like if I walked into this room and just started looking at this right now, um, the history of how you started this is gone, and and that constantly happens to me. It's like, uh, and a lot, and most artists, it's like you do something underneath, and you use it as a roadmap to get to a certain point, and then pretty
right,
much after a certain point, it's like it's gone. You're just working with
yeah,
you know.
yeah. That's actually a really great. Thank you for bringing that up, John. That is the reason why I started to get into doing studies separately and then blowing them up, because I was doing underpaintings, um, opaque underpaintings, and then going over on top. And I realized as I was covering up, I was like, man, there's such a beauty to this underpainting. I wish I could just keep it as a separate thing. And I don't want it to go. I spent so much time on this, and I really enjoyed doing this. And so I thought, and that's when I fell across. I'm like, I wish there was a way that I can kind of preserve it. And I realized, okay, doing a drawing separately, or doing whatever the heck I wanted to, drawing mixed in with some painting separately, then scanning that in and blowing it up, is a way of preserving that. That way I have all the art, and nothing ever gets lost to me. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, it does. Totally.
Yeah.
The other thing I was going to tell you is don't rush, because I know you need to make this really good. We have a reason for that, so
Yes,
don't
yes,
try to
yes.
just like blow through it just for the demo's sake. Um, just just take your time, relax, do your best piece.
Is there some bias going on right now? What?
So
Something you
there's
want to share with everybody, John?
just
so
market demands, the
I
market
made a
demands.
financial commitment to this paint.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. This is just,
Yeah,
I
whatever the
have some
client
interest in him
wants.
finishing it.
yeah.
Yeah. It's its best interest. It's like, oh man.
It's
It's
beautiful. I love it.
oh, thanks. I'm glad. I hope this is somewhat insightful. I want to just show you off right here. We can actually show you here. The thing's dry. I don't know if you can see that. It's
Wow.
super corrugated, but it's not fully dry yet. But it's getting dry. But you can see it's cleared up, and there it is. Right. So all of this color underneath, and this is the reason why I like. I've fallen in love with the way of applying paint, kind of like in these tiles or touches. Is it allows all of the colors to kind of optically mix, and I really like. I got that from doing pastel painting, and I always love that idea of like, and then you know experimenting with like overlapping layers of Prismacolor pencils over like an oil wash. Um, as my teacher Bill Monat showed me via your dad, John, showing him doing that to do that. But I always love that idea. There's something about an opaque passage on top of an under, like a one layer on top of another layer. The building up of those layers. I always found
Yeah, the
really built
history
the
to it.
history.
Great.
Yeah, yeah, and you
That's
know,
that's one of the obvious. Well, one of the things I think that separates like really mature artists, where they can, where they're thinking about the history, they're thinking about, I'm not going to touch that. They have the
yeah,
ability
yeah,
not to touch that. And that's what I was
yeah,
laughing about earlier about, me destroying drawings constantly. It's like,
right.
um, the good ones, uh, the good ones that I do, the ones that I think that are good that I do, I have more self control, and I stop myself. But man, I ruin a lot of them.
Yeah. No, I completely get empathize with that. You know, uh, and I think that's the. I found that my studies. I mean, I used to do that so much, and I think that's what I, in a different way. Like I would overwork things and not finish them at the same time. you know, uh, and the way I got over that was doing these studies as tightly as I could and making them finished pieces in themselves, and it kind of showed me what I needed to invest my time in and when I didn't. Like, okay, this is just as good as just one brushstroke, one shape. Okay, great, because it worked well in the study. It's going to work well in my final painting as a large shape, and it allowed me to kind of get into the idea of controlling and being able to sensitize my eyes to edge control and controlling detail and information. Like for instance, down here, I could keep this broad. I don't have to nuance this. But then as it gets into here, I want to be really careful with my drawing. You'll notice I'll it's something I saw Donato Giacola do, just use his brush handle kind of as an eraser, to cut back on certain uh, strokes that you put down.
I was going to ask you about that. Point that out.
Yeah.
But seen you do it quite a bit.
Yeah. So you see me mess up quite a bit. Every time I do that, it's because I messed up. So, to your statement on galleries, one thing I wanted to say was, um, I'm not going to name names, but I was, I got into two really good galleries out of school. And one of them was in Park City, Utah, that was really well known. And I was really shocked that I got in it, and it was great. And I sent them a bunch of stuff, and they had looked at my work. It was my thesis work, and where I did all these portraits of my family members, and they had said, we love this type of work. And I didn't get that when they said we love this type of work means that they want to see more of it, right? Because I was just young, I guess, and just like, okay, now they they're they didn't bring, I was thinking they were bringing Raymond Bonilla, the artist, who could do whatever he wants, not Raymond Bonilla, the portrait, or the artist known for his portraits, and so I was doing all these other different things, and I'd have conversations with the owner, and she was very pleasant, but I didn't get the fact that, like, she was used to, this was a great gallery, and she was used to artists like having their thing and being fully formed, and like this is what they did. And so she attempted to try and help me out, and she would say, well, do you have any like car scenes or anything like that, or maybe mechanics working on cars? I think that'd be a pretty good idea. And so she started to try and help me to, with my ideas, and they were, of course, not great, because again, they don't, just because they're an art gallery owner doesn't mean that they know how to guide, or give ideas to artists, and so, it didn't work out, and I ended up getting dropped at the gallery because I just didn't sell. I sold one painting out of, like, you know, over 2 years, 3 years, or I think it was 2 years, and they dropped me and they sent me back my work. And I learned a lot from that, from that thing, making sure that I was not confusing uh, the gallery owners, that I had a consistent body of work, that which was the work that they were going to plan on getting, which work I was going to end up sending them if they asked me to submit work to a group show or a solo show or whatnot.
Well, that's one of the, I think, huge values when you're approaching galleries, that you do have a body of work.
Yeah.
Because it's there.
Right.
If you're trying to create it and you're behind the eight ball with them, that you run into that for sure.
Totally. And
I
I
think
had a body. I had a body of work. I had a body of work. It just wasn't the work. I knew inside that that's not the work I wanted to do forever. But they didn't know that. They just looked at what my portfolio showed. So what a surprise. They were expecting the stuff they saw in my portfolio.
Did you ever have a gallery owner turn to you and make a suggestion? These paintings sold really quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah.
More like that.
Yep. Yep. I just had recently, in a gallery, they'd said, great job on the show. And I'd sold most of the pieces that I had sent out to the gallery. And well, out of the 3 pieces, I sold 2 of them. And the gallery owner had said, we got about 7 calls for this one piece that you did. I'm just putting it out there, and, it's like, okay, and so, like, the thing is, you just have to make sure that the thing that they're saying they want more of, the perfect storm is the thing that you're doing already,
Right. Or,
and
and the answer to that is, yeah, well, that was just the study. I did it. I did it, 4 times that size. Of course,
right.
it's a lot more expensive, but
Right. Yeah, you got it. It is a hustle too.
yeah.
You
Oh
got to
man,
hustle.
I've answered this question a number of times. They said, like, which was the galleries are a lot more commercial than the illustration world. I thought they were. I
Oh yeah.
think they are.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
that's how to
Yeah.
sell anything. Um, illustration world, you're most of the time you're dealing with people that went to art school and went to study illustration, and they're used to buying illustration. Um,
Yeah.
Not so
And
much the gallery world. Well,
and
and again, there's exceptions. I mean, there's good there's great gallery owners that know a ton, but there's
totally.
don't know anything.
Right. And it's all about sort of navigating that. And one thing I wanted to conclude on, because I know we're wrapping up, is
Yeah, we kind of get
um, you know, you hopefully what I've shown over this past month is just given you is possibilities, um, and hopefully there's one or two things that out of the myriad of things that I showed that you could use to help in your own pictures. But you know, I got here through researching other artists and looking at how other artists work and talking to other artists about their careers and reading about other artists successes and failures, and really thinking about and laying out how to go about what type of artwork I wanted to do at the end of the day, because if I could wake up and get to do the pieces that I want to do, then uh, I'd be pretty happy and consider myself pretty lucky. And you know, luckily so far, over the past couple few pair of years, that's been the case, and it's great. But it didn't come overnight, and so but as long as you stick with it and you're conscious of things, and you're trying to always improve, um, and you know what you want and you're goal oriented, you're gonna get there. So um, yeah, so thank you, John. Thank you, Timmy. Thank you, Bill.
Raymond.
Thanks for
You are phenomenal. I mean, I love the painting. I love all the process talk and looking at all your work and how you got there. The stories, everything is fantastic. And everybody that's listening, and hopefully that will listen in the future, this is the first of many of these, of getting to know one artist in their journey. And we're going to be next month. It's John Nymeister, and you're going to learn how a concept artist developed himself, and what he does day in and day out, and how he got there.
That's going to be great.
Yeah, and I'm very excited about it. Audrey's going to follow them. I got I've booked we're doing the art directors month in the month of June now, and I got some of the best art directors in the industry in here that are going to be talking to you.
Oh yeah.
And you're going to learn a ton. And so part of that journey, Ray, and part of why something like this is, I think, really helpful, is it makes it easier for other people. A place that you can get the information. So
Absolutely.
Raymond, thank you so much. Timmy, this worked out really well.
Yeah, so great. Thanks, Raymond.
Awesome.
Thank you, everyone.
We got to give everybody applaud to Ray. And Ray, we want you to relax, take a deep breath, and finish that painting. So,
Yeah.
Great.
All
Be
right.
sure to share the final image.
Yeah,
I will.
Yeah.
Remember, we got the Still Life Challenge coming up.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
beautiful still. Ray's not allowed to enter.
Yeah.
I need to win back the money I lost from paying off Addie,
Pay it forward, right?
Yeah, I've got expenses.
Yeah, this is a Ponzi scheme, definitely.
Yeah.
Somehow we're gonna figure out how to make a Ponzi scheme out of that.
Yeah.
we haven't quite crossed that.
So so that artist then pays that artist.
Right. And if you get all your three friends and they get three friends,
that's right.
Everyone's rich.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Great night.
Thank you.
You were awesome, man.
Thank you.
Talk to you